Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 20th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this video, I wanted to talk again a little bit about consciousness and sort of intuition I received in the last few hours about vibrations. This idea, again, that everything is a vibration. I also was guided by someone from the channel, actually, K&A. So thanks very much for pointing that video out to me. This kind of intuition that I had, that everything is a vibration, nested one inside of the other, and this embedding process. And I just needed this last little piece of puzzle to understand how that happens and how it's linked to this golden ratio. So let's just jump into the first topic, which is consciousness. Now, the kind of idea that popped into my head when I was trying to understand things, and I always say that there are these logic layers in the universe, or key moments, like a star, which is the bridge between the world of physics and chemistry, then the cell, the living cell, which is the bridge between chemistry and biology, and then the human, or humanoid, which is the bridge between biology and something higher that, of course, is very hard for us to model. But then how is this linked to consciousness? Well, I'm wondering if these ideas can be thought of as these fundamental colors, basically. So for instance, that in the rainbow, or even just in colors, you have like several basic colors like red, blue, and yellow, I think, or something like that. I'm not absolutely sure, but actually I think it's red, green, and yellow. But just disregard that. But just what I mean is that from a certain combination of these colors, if you put a little bit more red, a little bit less yellow, or a little bit more green, a little bit less yellow, you can get these different sort of shades or blends. But all it is just a certain mix between some of the fundamental colors. And you can get an infinite gradient of different colors from just the combination of several core colors. And this is what I mean by saying that there are only these key logic layers in the universe, and all the rest are just expressions of blends between those two extremes or polarities, or as a continuum. So you can think that you have the star as one fundamental color, and then a planet is an expression of a blend between the idea of the living cell, which is sort of living chemistry, and physics. So it's just like this expression of a combination between two fundamental states of consciousness that blend in a certain way and then form a planet. And then you have, for instance, between the living cell and humans, you have all the expressions of animals, plants, and you can think of their consciousness as being built between that of a cell and that of whatever is human and above human. And it's this blend. You can say that, for instance, in computer code, you have these 255 number for the ratio for the presence of these different colors, and the combination of those gives you a certain shade, a precise shade on that continuum. And so you can think of consciousness And the universe basically tries to be very, very efficient in storing information. And so it tries to store the minimum information it needs to recreate all of the complexity. And the same happens for light, basically. You just need to have a few fundamental building blocks, a few fundamental colors that you pick from. And then by combining them in a certain way, you get all of the other shades. And so you don't need to remember all of the other shades. You just need to remember the core few. And the same works for DNA, which is high signal to noise ratio, as Dan Winter says. Now, Dan Winter, that is another video I wanted to talk about, which is this video that has been shown to me by one of my viewers, and thanks a lot to him, which talks about the golden ratio and vibrations. And so this is the second topic I want to talk about. So the first one was how these kind of layers fit into this idea of consciousness. So everything is consciousness, and the expression of that consciousness in material form, so whether it's minerals, planets, animals, plants, is just the result of the blend between the consciousness of these various layers. And as you know, the color white is a combination of all of it, which is why in my videos, I often refer to God as white, void as dark black, because in white light, you have everything. So it's a nice way to depict this. And of course, there are layers above humans. It's just that it's so complex, so difficult to envisage what it is actually when humanity starts functioning like one global organism, just like when chemistry starts functioning as one global organism. It's beyond our comprehension. But basically, that is what... So let's say that humans are here. And, oh, this is another thing I want to talk about. So basically, you have a certain level of perfection or stability of each of these layers that has sort of found its color, its vibration. So you can think of animals and plants as kind of perfect or on balance and finding their vibration, and humans are trying to find and settle on where they're actually at. And all of the layers below are basically stabilized, so the star, the planets, they all found their vibration, and we're kind of still trying to zero in on what it is to be human, what it means to be human. And by sort of exploring all the consciousness that we're made of, all of the colors that we're made of, that is what this ascension process is. Ascension process is in my mind. It is simply to figure out what it is to be human, what it means to be human, what mix of consciousness it takes to be human, and then be human, and then sort of stabilize. And this chaos or interference that I always talk about gets displaced upwards in something else, which is whatever we are made of, whatever global organism we are a part of, is then going to go through the same process of trying to stabilize and finding its ideal or balanced blend of consciousnesses between all of that it is composed of, which is, cells, us, even, chemistry, all of the worlds, all of the layers before us, and something above. Now, the golden ratio and vibrations. Now, there's this video from Dan Brown here. I'll just show you quickly on YouTube. So Dan Winter, sorry. So Dan Winter, just quickly Google this if you want. It's really, really interesting. The galactic history part is probably the weakest part of his presentation, but all the rest is really, I find, extremely relevant. And basically what he shows is that the golden ratio in terms of vibrations, if you have several vibrations, for instance, that start from here, their frequency relative to each other, to make sure that they are that they don't interfere with each other and that they form a harmonious whole is based on the golden ratio. So basically you could say that the frequency of each of these follows the golden ratio sequence. 21, and then what is it? 34, what is it? 13, 21. My math is a little rusty, and then etc. So if the relative frequencies of all of these vibrations follows this sequence relative to each other, then you can stack an infinite amount of vibrations and they won't interfere with each other. And that's really, really interesting, because then the golden ratio is basically the strategy that infinity found in order to escape or to reach a certain amount of order out of chaos, and an order which is harmonious and allows all of it, all of infinity, to coexist and avoid this kind of superposition or interference between waves, which would mean that it would interfere with itself, and therefore it could not sort of exist in an orderly fashion. Now, of course, perfect symmetry means that even for this sequence, you have an opposite sequence, -2, -3, -5, -8, which is why also you need to have some kind of a little bit of disharmony in this whole equation. So there's always one disharmonious element in the universe that sort of makes these two opposites, makes sure that these two opposites don't superimpose and revert back to nothingness. And that is our role as humans right now, I find. If you watch my video entitled The Importance of Free Will, you'll see that even if infinity found this kind of balance and harmony in the arrangement of vibrations in this manner, according to the golden ratio, then there is still perfect symmetry still applies, which means you still have, for all of these combinations of vibrations of exact opposite phase, which means that it reverts back to nothingness. And so disharmony and harmony go together, I guess, and always with this idea of growing in complexity, because this, of course, the sequence, Fibonacci sequence and golden ratio, this goes on to infinity. But this little element of disharmony to make sure that they don't superimpose also has to, this logic also has to continue into infinity, which is why we won't be getting rid of polarity. Maybe we'll get rid of polarity at our level, but it'll exist at another level. But I really encourage you to watch this video, because I find there a lot of revelations there. So that was the first revelation for me. It was giving this kind of scientific form to this idea of vibrations nested into each other and this harmonious state that they reach, and the golden ratio. And of course, this ties into music and, you know, the 12/13 notes, and how you build a chord, how the different notes interact with each other, what are the ratios between the notes. All of this is also tied to the golden ratio, which that's the whole idea of music. And if you actually listen to, this is what's interesting, is that if you listen to a symphony, for instance, of violins, what makes it so beautiful is that this kind of inherent imperfection, or the fact that each violin plays slightly off key, and together they form this rich chorus, which again is, if you add just a tiny bit of imperfection to this, then it really becomes perfect. Because if each single violin was playing exactly the same note, exactly the same vibration, then it would just stack up and it would just sound very, very loud and very, very, well, not very nice, actually. If you just try to do this on a computer and you take one sine wave and then you just copy this 10 times, you'll just have a more powerful sound, higher in volume, but not higher in information, actually. Information. And so you have this pure state of the vibrations according to the golden ratio, and then something has to kind of come and interfere a bit with them to allow for more information to be stored, but still keeping the logic or the frame of the golden ratio. And even more interesting is if each violin then plays the perfect same note, but let's say half of the violins plays this vibration and the other half play the opposite vibration of opposite phase, which is this exact same note, just inverted phase, then you get silence. And so the richness of a symphony and the beauty of it is this very, very interesting blend between order, perfect order on the one hand, following, certain golden rules like the golden ratio for the notes and the music, and chaos, which is still within that sort of frame of perfection, just going slightly above, slightly below, and making this more rich as far as the information that you produce. Now, Dan Winter's video also goes on in explaining something really, really interesting, and that is DNA, which is also built according to the golden ratio, of course. And one really interesting thing is this feedback loop between DNA and the heartbeat and emotions. Now, he showed that basically when people feel bliss or love, the heart emits a certain frequency, which is in line with the golden ratio, which is closer to the golden ratio. And that activates certain chunks of the DNA, which allows for better sort of replication of the DNA and activates certain parts of the DNA. And even the DNA as such, the way that it's structured is also according to the golden ratio. And so this is really, really interesting because it means that emotions are just, again, as I've said in other videos, as far as my intuition went, but I didn't have the kind of scientific knowledge to back it up. The emotions that we feel are just representations of interactions between certain sets of vibrations. And when the interaction of those vibrations is closest to the golden ratio, it means that they are at their peak in terms of harmony and compatibility. And this means that you're adding more information and you're making it richer without destroying anything and making everything sort of compatible. And so you can see that biology has this kind of feedback mechanism for evolution. Like the first living cell, for instance, whatever interaction with other living cells was most beneficial was in line with the golden ratio and then got stored inside the DNA as information about what it just went through. And, this kind of the fact that our emotions are at the root sort of produced or created through the relationship of vibrations to this golden ratio is really, really interesting. So I really encourage you to watch that video. I think it will blow your mind, even though it's kind of hard to follow because he goes really, really fast in the explanation. But it basically shows that organizing vibrations according to the golden ratio is the best way to store, it's the most efficient way to store information in the most efficient way, basically, and the geometry also that comes from that. So I think that's it for this video, and see you in the next one. Hope you enjoyed it.